In the early 19th century, apart from a handful of cottages, there were just 15 or so very large houses in the whole of East Sheen. They had sizable grounds and dated back to the 17th and 18th centuries. Wealthy families, usually with an old heritage and often with titles, had lived in East Sheen for many years. They were not the sort of people, as Alan Clark said about Michael Heseltine, who had to buy their own furniture. There was, for example, the Firs. This was an early 17th century house where, in 1805, the Countess of Buckinghamshire lived. Temple Grove was built in 1611. In 1800, Viscount Palmerston lived there. Sheen House was built before 1617 and in 1816 was owned by the Marquis of Aylesbury. East Sheen Lodge was built around 1720, and from 1806 Sir Archibald MacDonald, 1st Baronet of East Sheen, lived there. So that was the situation some 200 years ago. But with the coming of the railway to Mortlake and East Sheen in 1846, major changes began to take place. Merchants and professional men who worked in London had become very wealthy. There were bankers, lawyers, wine merchants, and colonial administrators. They and their families were attracted to areas such as East Sheen. Here they could live in large houses with extensive grounds, away from the bustle and grime of central London, while still commuting to their place of work. A new aristocracy, which could now afford to live in style, was emerging. So let's see who these new families were. Take, for example, those who were instrumental in overseeing the building of Christ Church. In the mid-1850s, it was agreed that a new church should be built in the south of the parish to accommodate the new parishioners of East Sheen. A committee of influential men was set up to oversee this enterprise, led by Edward Penrhyn, who lived at the Cedars. He had been called to the bar and was an MP. He was an impressive fundraiser and even persuaded Queen Victoria to contribute £100 to the new church fund. Octavius Omini, who lived at the Plains, was a banker and navy agent and was another prominent and early supporter of the new church, as was William Gilpin of Palewell Lodge, and he was a clothing contractor. With the backing of these enterprising and wealthy individuals, Christ Church was built, and it was consecrated by the Bishop of London on the 13th of January 1864. Many other wealthy professional or entrepreneurial individuals came to live in East Sheen over the next few decades. And until the beginning of the First World War, they lived in great style in grand houses with extensive grounds and with many servants. 20 years after the opening of the railway line to London, and just 2 years after Christ Church was consecrated, a bottle was laid in a block of stone on the 4th of January 1866, along with some coins and a letter stating, "This stone was laid by Mary Harriet, wife of Frederick Wigan, Esquire, in commemoration of the erection of this building as their residence." The letter was signed by Frederick and Mary Harriet, along with other members of the Wigan family, and their architect, Robert Philip Pope. Clare Lawn was the house in question, a magnificent house on a site next to Richmond Park. Mary Harriet and Frederick Wigan moved into the completed Clare Lawn with their 5 young children in March 1866. They are perfect examples of this new aristocracy of East Sheen. This map of 1901 shows East Sheen and Mortlake. You can see the river and Mortlake to the north, the railway station, and Sheen Lane leading south towards the park. At the top of Sheen Lane, by the entrance to Richmond Park, is Clare Lawn. The house and park shared a wall. There was no eastern section of Fife Road at the time. Frederick had bought 3 plots of land on which to build his house. 2 large paddocks were bought from William Sams and Captain Peter Page. Page's house and grounds were also purchased. The entire plot amounted to 11 acres. This modern map shows Clare Lawn Avenue, Parkgate Gardens, Stonehill Road, and the eastern part of Fife Road. And the blue line indicates the extent of the Clare Lawn estate. And this shows where the house stood in relation to the grounds. But why was the house called Clare Lawn? John Alfred Wigan, a successful hop merchant, bought a large house near Maidstone in Kent in 1824. It was called Clare House. Clare House was an impressive building, and its lands included ponds, woods, orchards, and a cricket field. And all around stood the hop fields of Kent. The house still exists and is now a Grade 1 listed building. John Alfred Wigan had married Elizabeth Lewis in 1815. John Alfred and Elizabeth didn't shy away from parenthood. They had 15 children, 7 sons and 8 daughters. Their 11th child was born in 1827, and he was christened Frederick. And it was Frederick Wigan, who was to build Clare Lawn. John and Elizabeth's 14th child was born in 1832. His name was James, and he grew up to become the brewer James Wigan, who built Cromwell House in Mortlake and was the joint owner of the Phillips and Wigan Brewery. And this is the Phillips and Wigan roundel that can be seen on the outside of the old brewery buildings today. James Wigan had come to work in the Mortlake Brewery in 1852, and 6 years later he married Maria Nichols in St Mary's, Mortlake. The brewery was proving a successful business, and James was able to build Cromwell House, an impressive Victorian villa by the river in Mortlake. James and Maria moved into their new home in 1858. So now we have one Wigan son making a successful living from brewing beer. Meanwhile, Frederick, the elder son, trained as a lawyer, and in 1853 he joined the family hop firm, Wigan and Company, Hop Factors of Southwark Street, as a senior partner. This photograph is of young Frederick, taken in about 1850. There had been innumerable offices, warehouses and hop merchants in Southwark for decades. The area was situated south of the river on the main road leading from the hop fields of Kent. The whole district was awash with storage areas for the hops. Hop merchants were the link between the growers and the brewers. Wigan's was the largest firm of merchants in the mid-19th century, with several warehouses in the area. In 1864, the architect, Robert Philip Pope, who had built Clare Lawn and Cromwell House, then built a massive warehouse for the Wigan Company at number 61 Southwark Street. The company also bought offices at number 15 Southwark Street. Frederick became head of the family firm, a position he held for several decades. He has been described as one of Victorian Southwark's merchant princes. Frederick Wigan had become a very wealthy hop merchant. The Hop Exchange in Southwark Street was built in 1866. By the mid-19th century, brewing was second only to cotton in terms of its contribution to GDP. In 1875, consumption of beer reached its peak at 280 pints per person. It was a very lucrative business to be in, and the splendour of the Hop Exchange reflects this. This is a modern photograph of the Hop Exchange exterior, and this the interior. And a photograph of the Hop Exchange doors, which shows the Kent emblem of a white horse on a red background, indicating its important link with Kent. But let's leave Southwark for a while and return to SW14. James Wigan had been living and working in Mortlake since 1852. He had moved into Cromwell House in 1858 with his wife Maria. This is a drawing showing the gazebo of Cromwell House on Thames Bank. James's brother Frederick would no doubt have been a regular visitor to Cromwell House, and he certainly met his future wife in Mortlake. Mary Harriet was the daughter of Joseph Blunt of West Park and sister of the solicitor William Blunt, who lived at Riverside House on Thames Bank, next door to Cromwell House. This drawing also shows Riverside House on the right. Frederick and Mary Harriet married at St Mary's, Mortlake on the 25th of April, 1857. She was 22 years old, and the couple lived in Chiswick for the next 9 years. Frederick and Mary had 10 children, 6 girls and 4 boys. This photograph is of Mary Harriet with her first child, Amy, born in 1858. In March 1866, the Wigan family moved to Clare Lawn, their substantial Victorian family home, clearly designed by Frederick to accommodate his large family and to display his status and wealth. This photograph of Clare Lawn shows the drive and grand entrance. In 1913, a national property valuation was carried out. This gave a description of all properties in the country, and from it, as well as in documents from the Wigan family archives, we can see Clare Lawn in detail. The valuation document describes the first floor as having 8 principal bedrooms, 2 with dressing rooms, and 5 other rooms, which included day and night nurseries. There were 2 bathrooms and 2 WCs. The lavatories, I understand, were lined with marble. I don't have a photograph of the lavatories, but this is a photograph of one of their baths. And bathroom taps. If we move to the ground floor, there was a library, a billiard room, morning room, drawing room, a picture gallery, conservatory, a dining room and separate servery, reception room, a large hall with 2 principal staircases and 2 WCs. In the basement were the servants' quarters. There was a butler's pantry and his bedroom, the footman's bedroom, the servants' hall and their sitting room, a large kitchen, a storeroom and cellars. The female servants had use of the 9 bedrooms on the top floor of the house. There was also a passenger lift. In the grounds there was stabling for 3 horses with a loft above and 4 loose boxes. There was a cattle shed and a piggery and a cart shed with another loft above. The market value of the house in 1913 was £10,000, and all that from the buying and selling of Kentish hops. To give you an idea of the size of the Clare Lawn household, the 1891 census shows that Frederick was head of the household, with Mary Harriet, his wife, and 7 of their children, aged from 33, and that was Amy, the eldest, to Edgar, who was 14. 2 children had already left the home, and baby Henry had died in 1866. In addition to the family, there were 3 housemaids, a cook, a kitchen maid, a scullery maid, 2 footmen, a nurse, an under-nurse, and a schoolroom nurse. They all lived in the main house, 20 people in total. In the coach house were a coachman and his wife, a second coachman, groom, and a farrier. In the lodge was a gardener, his wife, and their baby son. There would of course have been many others who helped with the extensive gardens and grounds, as well as daily domestic staff who didn't live in and therefore did not appear in the census return for Clare Lawn. Many local men described themselves as gardeners in the census, and many domestic workers would also have come from Mortlake to work daily in the big houses. Clare Lawn had been built in 1866, and in 1893 additions were made to the house. This was the heyday of the arts and crafts movement, and the new extension reflected this. This architect's plan shows that extension, with a picture room, conservatory, library and study. The architects were Sir Aston Webb and Ingres Bell, both enthusiasts for the arts and crafts movement. They also believed that the design and decoration of a building should be of a consistent style. Sir Walter Crane, the painter and illustrator, was invited to produce the elaborate plasterwork, and Stephen Webb created the marquetry panels. All were of arts and crafts period design and of the highest quality. This is an exterior drawing of the conservatory and picture room. This drawing of the study illustrates the plasterwork by Walter Crane. This is a panel for the study by Stephen Webb. And a drawing of the picture room, again with Walter Crane's beautiful plasterwork. And finally, a drawing of the conservatory. It was a very grand house. Frederick was a keen gardener, and in the grounds of Clare Lawn there was a winter garden, a range of cool houses, camellia and orchid houses, a massive rock garden and a kitchen garden. There were also many water features. And this is just one of them. There was also room for a rugby pitch, and on the 5th of January 1881 the East Sheen rugby team played their first match against Marlborough Nomads. The East Sheen team lost on that occasion, but rugby matches continued to be played at Clare Lawn until 1899. This photograph of the back of the house shows the glass houses. In 1890, Frederick Wigan persuaded a Mr. Young, the orchid grower at Kew Gardens, to come to Clare Lawn and take charge of his orchid collection. The Gardening World magazine wrote 2 articles on Frederick's collection of orchids, noting that there was a particularly sweet-smelling Cymbidium Wiganianum, which he had raised at Clare Lawn. And this is it. It is still a popular orchid because it both looks and smells stunning. There was central heating throughout the house, but I'm not sure what fuel was used to begin with. Electricity came to the borough in 1901, when the Barnes Electricity Works were inaugurated. This building was, and a part of it still is, on Mortlake High Street. At first, not everyone wanted to be connected to the council's electricity supply, and Frederick Wigan was one who refused a connection and preferred to rely on his own private plant. However, his engineer was found dead one morning in the engine room at Clare Lawn, and Frederick then asked the council to run the plant until they could connect the house to the local supply. Frederick Wigan was not living in East Sheen when the original plans for Christchurch were drawn up. However, in 1886, an appeal was started for the church to be enlarged, and Frederick was treasurer of the committee that was set up to run this development. A new aisle, 2 new doorways and porches were created, and a new heating system was installed. Frederick was a religious man and generous in his gifts to the church. Among them were the font, alabaster pulpit, oak choir stalls, and 4 stained glass windows. Frederick was not only a benefactor at Christchurch. The Wigans' hop offices almost rubbed shoulders with St Saviour's in Southwark, and Frederick became involved with that church too. He was a vestryman at St Saviour's for over 20 years, and Frederick was an influential figure in the formation of the Southwark diocese and its cathedral, and he was a generous benefactor when the church was being rebuilt in the 1890s. The new diocese of Southwark was created in 1904, and St Saviour's became Southwark Cathedral the following year. Frederick became its first treasurer and donated many of the building's furnishings. He was described by the Bishop of Southwark as a man of princely generosity. There is a bust of Frederick Wigan today in the south transept of Southwark Cathedral. And to celebrate the opening of the cathedral's nave, Frederick treated 500 local paupers to a celebratory meal at Southwark Baths in Camberwell. Frederick Wigan was knighted in 1894, the same year he became High Sheriff of Surrey. Sir Frederick was then created a baronet in 1898 in the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Honours. He was also a magistrate for the City of London and director of the North London Railway Company. Frederick and Mary Harriet were close friends of the Duke and Duchess of Teck, later King George V and Queen Mary, when they lived at the White Lodge in Richmond Park. Now a baronet himself, a man of considerable wealth and status, who lived in an impressive villa on an estate with many servants, Sir Frederick could be called a member of a privileged order, or a new aristocracy. But where has this phrase, the new aristocracy of East Sheen, come from? In 1903, Alec Cook wrote in his novel The Parish Doctor a thinly disguised account of Mortlake and East Sheen under the name of Riverside cum Updean, and I quote in part: "The parish of Riverside," that's Mortlake, "had been of importance at one time as the seat of porcelain, pottery and tapestry manufacture, but had declined and become impoverished. But during recent years, the ubiquitous railway had found its way through the parish, which it unwittingly cut in two. To the south of the railway was the rising district of Updean," that's East Sheen, "rising not only in respect of its numerous villas and well-kept streets, but ascending by an easy and pleasant gradation from the railway to the gate of the Royal Park. In the more substantial of the detached villas of Updean lived quite a new aristocracy, with a very pretty church being the spiritual home of this new aristocracy." Sir Frederick died suddenly at Clare Lawn on the 2nd of March 1907, aged 80. He was buried in East Sheen Cemetery, and there's a marble tablet to his memory in the chancel of Christ Church. His estate amounted to £560,000. Mary Harriot died at Clare Lawn in April 1915. Later that year, the furniture and effects were sold. Christie's auctioned the contents of the house in 252 lots, which included a Millet and 2 Alma-Tadema's, which each raised about 1,000 guineas. The property then came onto the market, and it was eventually bought by a Mr. Lancaster. He was said to have spent a great deal of money on the house's interior, and he equipped it with modern appliances. However, Mr. Lancaster did not live long in his newly refurbished home, as he died just a few years after he had purchased it. Clare Lawn was demolished between 1924 and 1926. 4 of Clare Lawn's cream marble fireplace mantels were removed from the building prior to demolition and were soon put up for sale in New York. The baronetcy continues. Sir Michael Wigan is the presumed 6th baronet of Clare Lawn. But closer to home, memories of Sir Frederick's generosity live on. The Wigan Hall was built by Sir Frederick in 1892, and in his will Sir Frederick made it clear that the Frederick Wigan Trust, which he instituted in 1895, should be continued for the benefit of Mortlake's parishioners. The hall was for many decades the social centre of Mortlake and was greatly missed when it was demolished in 1969. But the Wigan Trust remains as a local charity that makes grants to other voluntary bodies. But more widely, Sir Frederick helped invigorate the local area. He was a generous and active member of the local community, and he and his family were true examples of the new aristocracy of East Sheen, and Clare Lawn was their stately home. But a final note on our parish as it was before the First World War. In June 1912, there was a bazaar and garden fete held at East Sheen Lodge in aid of the building fund for a new church, the church that was to become All Saints. The garden fete was a massive enterprise, and there were some 60 people on the organising committees. The bazaar was opened by the Duchess of Teck, and the event took place over 3 days. The Countess of Dudley ran the fancy stall. Her mother, the Dowager Countess of Dudley, ran the flower stall. Lady Franklin the hat stall, and Queen Mary supplied items for the Indian goods stall. The old aristocracy of East Sheen was still in evidence, but also involved were the Leicester Penryns and the Wigans. Dr. Mackintosh presented a play. There were numerous concerts and entertainments, demonstrations, exhibitions, and both teas for 1 shilling and dinners for 3 and 6 were served at other houses in the parish. It was an all-inclusive 3 days where everyone seemed to have a role, from Queen Mary to the Vicarage Working Party and the Girls' Friendly Society. It was an event for the whole parish, and a last glance of Edwardian England before the Great War changed it all forever.